Hello, dear viewers. Welcome back. I've taken a break. It's been some time. Things have been happening in my life, but we will get to that later. Let us continue where we left off. We had discussed my move to Mumbai, how I acclimatized to this new environment of the big city. We discussed my school, the Godrej school, the Udayachal school, and how I was loving and thriving in this new environment. So I thought today I could talk about Ruby, my older sister. So as you remember, things were difficult for us in Dapchari, and Ruby, being the oldest, had to deal with a lot. Early on, she was thrust the responsibility of looking after the baby. So Ruby was about 6 when baby Molly was born, and Ruby was responsible for baby Molly. So I don't remember if I've shared with you, but one day Ruby, being a child, was probably not always paying attention to baby Molly. So one day, as usual, mom woke up really early, went into the cow sheds to, milk the cows and look after them and all of that. And when she came out of the cow shed, she saw that baby Molly had pooped and was playing in the poop. I can't remember if I've shared this before. And then she probably also took that hand to her mouth. So that day, mom beat up Ruby a lot. Like, she was so angry with Ruby for not looking after baby Molly well. And baby Molly was a fussy one. So sometimes if mom would be cycling off to, the electricity office, because they would just cut the electricity, they would harass us because we were like the outsiders. We were not the uh, tribals who had been given land. We were the people who bought it from the original person who had been awarded that land. So they perceived us as outsiders, and they did, those government officials who worked there, they did try to harass us, and they singled us out unnecessarily. And a lot of times when dad had moved already to Bombay, and he was still settling down in Godrej before getting us, and even sometimes when we just went there for vacations, they would trouble seeing that mom was just there with the girls. So those people did think that this is a chance to just kind of, I don't know what they were thinking, but they would trouble her. So sometimes when mom would be cycling off to the electrical office or to Desai Bhai's store to get supplies, Molly would follow crying, and then poor Ruby had to run after her to kind of console her and stop her from following mom all the way. So these kind of things used to happen. Then I remember one day when Ruby had to cycle off to this iBuy's shop to get supplies. I think I mentioned this also. Ruby was cycling back. She didn't realize our turn had already come. She was almost going ahead. Then she took a sharp turn, and then she fell, and then all the supplies scattered everywhere. So what I'm getting at is that very early on, Ruby had kind of learned to be responsible. She had probably learned the hard way. She had seen the hardships as the oldest kid. And also once, I think what had happened was, Ruby decided to make a roti for dad as a little child. I'm not sure how old she was. So she had never done that in her life. So she cooked the roti on only one side. A roti is an Indian bread, for those who don't know. So she cooked the roti on only one side, and the second side was completely raw. And we cook it on a tawa. We don't put it in an oven. We don't put it in an oven. So you have to kind of place it and then turn it on the tawa so that it cooks properly. So Ruby got the roti to dad, and she was like, "Look, dad, I made roti." And she was very excited that she had made roti for the first time, and she made it for her dad. But then also sometimes, like dad being, they were still in their 20s, mom and dad kind of. They were themselves kind of stupid kids, maybe. So I think dad just slapped her for giving him that kind of roti. So that is kind of sad. And I think, I'm not sure, another time dad asked Ruby to make tea, and she was very small, and she said, "I've never made tea, I don't know how to make it." I think he got angry about that also. So these kind of things kind of made Ruby grow up sooner. She became more serious, more responsible. Of course, she continued being a child. Like, she used to enjoy scaring us. Like I spoke about the Dapshari bathroom thing where she used to throw twigs from that tall window and giggle. And she used to like scaring us suddenly, the jump scares that you just pop out from somewhere and scare someone. So she was also a kid, but also she had learned to become a very responsible person, a little more serious than another child of her age. But while dad was stationed at Madhya Pradesh, at that time they had put Roop in an English school. I think mom calls that place Pannu Tapar, not sure. But there was a city near the place where these people were working on their forest project. And Rupa was put in an English school in pre-primary, nursery and kindergarten. So then, when we moved to Bombay, our parents wanted her to join the appropriate class. She was 3 years older than me. I was 5 when we moved there. So Ruby would be 8. So she was probably right for class 3 or class 4. So now Jyotsna Ben and Shanvi sir probably took a decision that since she was in Marathi medium in the previous school, which was the Dapchari school, they recommended that she join second standard so that she could pick up. So our parents were like, no, she's very smart, she's very bright, she will pick up, please put her in at least third standard, if not fourth standard. So, but then Jyotsna Ben was very clear, she was like, no, she will be in second standard. So now what happened was, it's not just about academics and education, there's the whole social dynamics. So I was the youngest kid in my class, most kids in my class were 6-year-olds, and in the second standard, Ruby was the oldest kid in her class as an 8-year-old. So she was taller, she looked older. So I believe very subconsciously or unconsciously, this was giving her a complex of some kind. And another thing that made her feel worse about herself. So while she was in primary school, I'm not sure which class, there was some stage show where parents were invited. So we had these people called the Deshpandes. So one of the girls in one batch junior to me was Archana Deshpande. So her mom, Mrs. Deshpande, a very beautiful tall lady with a tiny, stocky, bald husband. What a stereotype. So she was attending the function. So Mrs. Deshpande was at the function, and Ruby was dressed in a sari for whatever skit they were doing. So at the end of the skit, when Mrs. Deshpande saw Ruby, like not on the stage but later, and she looked at her and she exclaimed in great amazement, she's like, "Oh, you are Ruby. I thought you were a teacher. I thought you're a grown woman. You're so tall. You look so much older than everyone." So Mrs. Deshpande went on, and then Ruby felt a very uncomfortable, very bad feeling. Like, as a child, what do you know? You can't express, and forget about protesting. That is so wrong to speak to a child like that. The child already was feeling bad. She already had a complex about being the oldest and tallest in her class. And then Mrs. Deshpande's comment, it kind of crushed Ruby. So that you can see how she related to her classmates. She always felt a little less. And to add to that, mom would tell her, since you're a couple years older than all your classmates, you have no excuse to not stand first in class. So Ruby was constantly standing second or third. There was a competition among the top 4 kids. One of them would be first, one of them would be second. So Ruby was usually second, and there was another kid called Sulakshana Hundekari who was always doing very well. She was a teacher's daughter. We had Hundekari teacher in high school. So that was one more thing where the parents just made the child unwittingly, they made the child feel really bad. So then that was one more thing where the parent tells the child that you have no excuse not to always stand first, you're older than your classmates. So that was something that stayed with Ruby constantly, that you're older than your classmates, you're older than your classmates. But despite these initial hiccups, later Ruby adjusted very well in school, and she was thriving and doing very well. And then later she became the school prefect, the sports captain, and all of these accomplishments. But one more issue I would like to touch upon over here is that constant "I wish you were a boy, I wish you were a boy" aspect, where my mom made no secrets of expressing her disappointment that we were not boys. And she took every opportunity to, rub it in and like make us feel bad that we were not boys. So even though I loved being a girl, there's no way I ever wanted to be a boy. But it was really bad to see that your parent wished you were someone else, something else, and was always disappointed and kept saying, if only you had a brother, if only I had a boy. And mom would also say that the first kid that I lost was a boy, and if I'd had that kid, none of you would have existed. So these things really hurt us and affected us deeply, which I think, again, like parents in their 20s are quite dumb. Some of them, not everyone. And then that's what makes them say such things. And it used to hurt deeply when mom would say, "Why are you not boys? Why are you not boys?" But it affected Ruby differently. For me, whatever it was, I would never want to be a boy. I just loved being a girl. I loved everything about being a girl, a little girl, the frocks and the hair, and just I never wanted, I thought boys were plain and girls were pretty. So I always wanted to be a but for Ruby, it was different. She took it to heart again because she had to kind of grow up quick, and we also had this thing of trying to please our parents all the time. Especially when you see that you don't have their approval, you try harder and harder to please them. And as a little impressionable child, you don't know how to figure out what are the messages that you should internalize and what you should just let go of. So Ruby started dressing like a boy, behaving like a boy. So that was one effect of my mother's constant nagging about why are you not a boy. That Ruby started wearing trousers and boy shirts kind of, and she used to play with the boys, the rough sports. And later, of course, she adapted. Then she changed that, and she was actually very feminine. And we, all three sisters, have very feminine, beautiful figures and all of that. We have very good proportions because my dad has always been very athletic, and dad always had great posture, great body because he was with the armed forces, and mom had good proportions. So all three of us had really good proportions. We looked very pleasing and pleasant. But this aspect of how mom affected our psyche, this unnecessary drilling of why are you not boys, that was completely avoidable. But all said and done, Ruby adjusted very well. And later, in her 40s or 50s, Ruby also spoke to dad about the times she had been hit for just being an innocent child who didn't even know that the parent expected something different. And then she had made her peace with her parents. She cried and they cried, I think. So they made the peace about the time when dad hit her and all of that. And all is well now with Ruby. So Ruby did get over all those hurdles, and she thrived, and she was a very bright student. She was great at sports, and she did very well in life, and she is still doing very well. So I just thought I would share the story of Ruby and how the move to Bombay affected her. So that's all for today, dear viewers, and take care, stay well, even though the COVID thing scare is mostly over. Take care of yourself, love you, and see you next time. Bye for now.